Hello, my name is Stephen Petters, and I have the privilege of presenting Steering the Substantial Spud Shortfall of 2022, which is my extra credit presentation for the IE 546 class in spring 2023. This is a real decision the company I work for was faced with. However, it should be noted that all financials, metrics, decision models, decisions, and outcomes are completely fictitious and do not necessarily reflect the choices my company made to address this issue. Let's get started. The content of this presentation includes the problem statement. I'll detail the objective of the study, why it's significant, specifically its monetary impact, what methodologies were used, and what the results and findings were. We'll also talk about discussion and conclusions for future work. My company relies heavily on the amount and price of available raw potatoes to run profitably. Potatoes are only grown and harvested once a year, and the remainder of the year thrives or struggles depending on that yield. 2022 was the worst crop yield, as defined by the amount of raw potatoes produced, in more than a decade. This drove costs of potatoes much higher than anticipated, and this, coupled with the 30-year high inflation in the United States, required my company to make hard decisions to ensure that the company could continue to thrive this year and in years to come. The main question the business was hoping to answer is, how should the company adjust its raw acquisition strategy to navigate through this historic year? A reminder that values here are for placeholder purpose only and do not reflect the actual costs incurred by the company, but instead represent a relative representation for the purposes of explaining the problem. The company is contracted to get a certain amount of raw from growers each year. However, when growers have a short year or cannot reasonably keep up with contracts, the company must go on the open market to fill the gap. Unfortunately, purchasing raw on the open market is 4 times as expensive as contracted potatoes. So the company needs to determine how much extra raw needs to be purchased to fulfill customer orders while not incurring too much profit losses. A reminder The decision tree for the current state problem is shown here. Direction of arrows indicate relevance and sequence relationships between nodes. The first decision that needs to be made is how many potatoes need to be purchased. This will influence how much the company needs to increase prices, how much competitors may purchase open market potatoes, and how much of a need focusing on core high margin customers becomes. This will likely cause some customers to look elsewhere for business and open the opportunity for competition to take that business. And all of these will impact cost, revenue, and overall profit. This slide shows the associated decision tree. It should be noted that no decision has stochastic dominance over another, thus expected monetary value will be used to make a decision. These values represent costs, so the objective is to get the lowest EMV possible. The first decision is how much potatoes to purchase. If company decides to not go after potatoes at all, then revenue loss is known from customer shorting and contract commitments on orders not being met. The other options for potato acquisition are high and medium, represented by the % increase of total volume. The second decision is whether to keep just the core high-margin customers or not. The third decision is to pass a lot or a little price increase onto the remaining customer base to offset costs. The final node is a chance node, the probability that the company's competition will be successful in luring the customers or not, with final expected costs being estimates. Calculating EMVs moving backward reveals the best path results in $32 million in losses, compared to $40 million if the company does nothing. It's still a bitter pill to swallow, but better than the alternative. And here is the path of those decisions. So based off of EMV methodologies, we would recommend the following for the greatest cost avoidance to the company. Number one is be aggressive in open market potato acquisition. And in this case, that represents a 10% increased volume. Number two is to keep only core business customers with the highest margins and increase production volume for those customers. And the final recommendation is to pass minimal cost increase onto customers that are remaining to prevent too much fallout and customers looking for better business elsewhere. Sensitivity analysis could also be conducted to find out which of the three decisions analyzed have the greatest impact on the overall profit loss. The company could also hire an informant to get better information to understand competitor conditions. And the decision tree could then be flipped to know the odds of the customers would win a bid before making the decision on potato acquisition, which would be very powerful. It is possible that other companies are feeling equal amount of pressure from loss in raw and therefore are equally unable to compete without also raising prices, which would change the probabilities used to calculate the EMV in the decision tree and possibly open up even more room for my company to raise prices without any fallout. And finally, for future work, the company's losses are spared for the most part this year, but what about next year? If this is to be a trend, how will the company continue to alter strategy to meet the demands of its customers without sacrificing profitability? These are all questions that can be answered in future research. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the presentation.